Hello, Business Principles students. Today we'll be discussing Chapter 1, Exploring the Business Environment and Economics. My name is Professor Frances Brunner. Again, the textbook that we're correlating to is Understanding Business, the Core, 3rd edition. However, you are able to use prior versions of this textbook if you find it at a lower cost or if you're able to rent it. The basic difference is that the names of the chapters and the ordering of the chapters may be slightly different. However, the information can change and each chapter is roughly the same. I highly recommend that you follow along with reading each chapter prior to our lecture so that we can discuss and have meaningful conversations. Our learning objectives for this chapter include talking about profit and risk at a very basic level. We'll discuss for-profit and not-for-profit organizations and how they affect the standard of living within their economies. We'll describe how the 5 elements of the business environment and how these elements affect the overall climate of the business individually and as a whole. We'll explain very basic economics, and we'll compare and contrast types of economic systems and the trend towards mixed economics. For the secondary page learning objectives will include the U.S. economic system and some of the indicators, including GDP. We'll talk about fiscal and monetary policy and review how past trends are repeated in the present and what they mean for you guys as future graduates. I want to point out in these slides, if the font is in red letter, then you should recognize this as a definition that will likely be referenced on the exam and that you should memorize or know and be able to recognize word for word and be able to explain. So our first definition of the semester is, what is a business? Having a business means that you're providing something, you have something available in the form of a good or a service, and that your operations functioning as that entity make money. So once you determine, who you're searching for to purchase your product and how your product fulfills their wants and needs, then you can go forward with tailoring the marketing, advertising, and distribution of information about your company on social media platforms, on print and non-print channels such as television, newspaper, and so on. We'll discuss that in the marketing chapter and later on in the semester. But basically, if you have a business, your goal is to make money and to continue the business. All right, so the most essential function of business is to make money, like we said in the last slide. Any kind of money coming into the business is considered revenue. And we're trying to get in more revenue, right? Which means that we want to ideally earn a profit. If we are spending more than we're selling, then we're operating at a loss. If you're operating at a loss for too long, eventually the business will cease to function. So our definitions here are revenue, the amount of money the business has coming in. Now, there are multiple types of revenue. There's sales revenue. There is revenue from sale of assets. There's multiple types, but in this case, all we want to know is that revenue is money coming in. Profit is revenue less expenses. So that's the money that we have left over after paying what we need to pay. Now, in finance and accounting, if any of you have taken these classes, you understand that there are different periods of time where we can recognize revenue and where we can determine whether or not we're making a profit within that time period. But again, business principles, foundational level, profit is we're making money after expenses. Loss is we are not making money. We are spending more than we're bringing in. Most companies and startups operate at a loss for anywhere from the first 1 to 3, 4, sometimes 5 years. And the business is able to perpetuate because they have startup funding, because they have loans or other types of financing. But again, if you operate at a loss for too long, the business will cease to exist. So, where does an entrepreneur play in the creation of wealth, in starting businesses, and making money? So I consulted ChatGPT shortly before this, and I got the statistic that okay, here it is. So ChatGPT output based on the web's general web search says that roughly 46% of small businesses make up the private sector workforce. That means anywhere from 59 to 62 million Americans are employed by small businesses. So entrepreneurs contribute a lot. They employ other people. The taxes are often routed to their zip codes, their counties and states. And so they are bringing money back into the locations that they serve and they sell to. So what does this mean for the surrounding community? This affects the overall standard of living. Your standard of living is basically a summation of what you can buy and what you can do with the money you have. It creates the standard by which you're able to operate and thrive. Now, we can imagine that the standard of living is different in different countries, right? Our standard of living in the United States is significantly different than the average person living in Mexico. Um, so, uh, so the creation, the proliferation of entrepreneurs and the creation of wealth goes back into communities and directly affects those individuals and the community's standard of living. All right, so being an entrepreneur sounds great. Having a business, earning revenue, investing back into communities, but the becoming an entrepreneur has certain risks accompanying it. So risks mean that you have the possibility of losing time or money in the business, and it may not end up being profitable. It may end up operating at a loss and eventually closing, right? So what is the risk to the entrepreneur here? Um, they may have a seed investment that they have put into the business, their own time, sweat equity. Um, they may have taken out personal loans or mortgaged homes, their personal assets in order to, basically gamble on this entrepreneurial pursuit. But ideally, and this is why I put Spider-Man in here, if you remember the very first Spider-Man, the best one, um, the uncle says, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So in this case, with entrepreneurship, comes great risk. And with risk comes a potential of great loss. So try to remember that as a way to uh, remember the risk should tie to profitability. We hope that the entrepreneur intends to be successful, but risks losing everything. So, responding to various stakeholders. So, stakeholders are anyone that has anything to do with your business. So, anyone that is affected by the business, either directly, indirectly, or community-wide. So, who are we talking about? We're talking about anyone that you employ, anyone in your community that could be affected by your business succeeding or failing, um, anyone who has invested in your company, whether you've taken out a loan from Chase Bank, then Chase would be your stakeholder. If you have private investors, then they would be your stakeholders. Anyone that you are using as a supplier, or a retailer on either end of the supply chain will be part of your stakeholder, community as a whole. So, what does this mean? As a business and as an individual entrepreneur or a corporation, or whatever your entity ends up being, you need to be aware of who your stakeholders are and you need to cater to those needs. So the graph in this slide represents all different types of stakeholders across the spectrum. Now, in in a very pure stakeholder situation, think about you attending college. Who does it affect when you are sitting in a classroom versus not? And how does it affect the people around you? So maybe it affects your parents. Maybe they're helping pay for college. Maybe you have a spouse or children. Then your t time is being taken from that. Perhaps time is being taken from an employer, or an employer is giving either an express or implied investment by allowing you time or potentially contributing money. These are all stakeholders. So in a company, if you're thinking about the different people who are affected by it, just remember that when you make one stakeholder happy, it may not make all of the others happy. For example, if you want to give your employees a raise, it may give them a raise, but then the investors at the end of the day might end up getting a smaller share of your total profits as a result. Or you, as the essential business stakeholder, may get less profits as a result. All right, a note about nonprofit organizations. So, a nonprofit is an entity that operates similarly to a business, but they are not, profit is not their end goal. So, these organizations, they are filed differently and they must operate differently. And therefore, they get a few tax breaks and some exceptions or exclusions that traditional businesses would take on because they are operating to benefit the community as a whole. Now, do nonprofits have stakeholders? Absolutely. If you think about the Red Cross, they assist about 100 million people a year. Everyone that they help is a stakeholder. Everyone that donates to the Red Cross or volunteers to them is a stakeholder. So, and then the textbook just mentions, and I wanted to point this out, that if you decide to open a nonprofit, make sure that your purpose is clear. You want to have individuals believing in your entity and contributing to it and working for it. However, if you operate a nonprofit, it needs to have some ground level benefits that are essential to keeping staff on board because burnout is real. And with a lot of the nonprofit initiatives, the people that you serve can take a lot of energy out of your employees. So, nonprofit work is draining. Make sure that you take care of those people. And similarly, if you go to work for a nonprofit, make sure that your physical health, your mental health, your time off, things like that are respected and that they have those kinds of programs available so you can make the most of your time working there. All right, some test prep questions for you. What is the difference between revenue and profit? Like I said, at a very elementary scale, revenue is money coming in. Profit is that same money less what you've spent on necessary expenses to operate the business. So what is risk and how is it related to profit? Hopefully, we want those things to be directly correlated. The increase in risk should result in an increase in profit. However, that is not guaranteed. We talked about the standard of living being the summation of what individuals can buy and how they can live their lives, right? This is everything from how much you'd pay for a gallon of milk to whether or not you can afford a home. And what does the term stakeholder mean? Stakeholder, it's a compound word, right? It's someone who holds a stake in your company or business, whether it be financial, resource, time, employment, or being part of the larger community. All right, moving on to the business environment. 5 elements in the business environment. We have economic and legal, technological, competitive, the social environment, and the global business environment. The pie chart that you see now shows a depiction of the business environment and how they basically combine to create the global business environment. So your business is affected by laws, by trade currencies, by developments in information technology, by the demographic of the area, by social media, by changes in families, age, um, and competitive um, portions such as the customer service environment, how your employees are treated and how they treat others, and the environment as a whole, existentially. So the technological environment. So technological is anything technology, right? Which at this point, I don't even think I have it listed here, but AI has completely overhauled every business and um, pretty much every action taken in business today. So that overhaul is going to dramatically change the way that we approach business and the way that we're able to become successful or unable. So productivity, this is definition that you need to know. It's your amount of output generated versus amount of input. So if you input 4 hours of work, how many widgets do you produce as a result? What is your productivity rate? Efficiency is the amount of resources that you input into producing an output. So if there are two architects and one completes the work in 3 hours, the other completes the work in 5 hours, you could say, well, the one that completed the work in 3 hours was more productive. Okay. Well, what if the architect that completed the work in 3 hours produced 10 times the amount of waste that the person that produced the output in 5 hours did? Well, you can say, yes, that person was more productive, but they weren't as efficient with their resources. All right. In the competitive environment, you have to compete with other businesses. Your pizza establishment is competing with every other pizza establishment in your area. Um, that pizza establishment needs to understand what people like on their pizzas. And what people put on their pizza can range depending on where you live, even within cities in the same state or within different states all across the country. For example, I would never put anchovies on my pizza, but it is preferred in some areas and it may or may not need to be offered, right? So understanding the customer's wants and needs, building a relationship with suppliers, and differentiating yourselves from the competition. This is all part of the competitive environment. Again, we'll expand on it in the marketing chapter. All right, the social environment is any demographic that affects your business. This includes the buyer's race, age, identity, gender, income level. And as the population continues to grow and shift, this will change the opportunities for some and increase some for others. For example, this is roughly remain unchanged, but the demography of the US is currently showing that the 25 to 54-year-olds are making up the 39% of the US market. This means that they will have a lot more buying power than the other market segments. This pie chart shows the demography of the US by age, excuse me, by race. So I revised this. Oh, I need to remove this down here. But I revised this using ChatGPT and qualifying the resources. So white non-Hispanic, currently as of 2025, statistical data represents 37.2% of the population. Then we have Hispanic, Black, and other races. So the demographics may influence consumer opinion as consumer preferences. And these are all part of the social environment that you'll have to consider when positioning your product. All right, note about Social Security. As our baby boomers are aging, reaching retirement and eventually passing on, a very large section of the population is coming out of the workforce and now becoming dependent on Social Security. So the question that I'm posing is, you know, do you think that we will be able to sustain Social Security by the time that you reach senior citizenship age? The short answer is no, no, we will not, unless there are some major changes made. All right, the global business environment. So this is everything that I'm asking you to check up on the Wall Street Journal, on the New York Times, on the Austin Business Journal. What international economic conditions are being posed? What tariffs or trade agreements are happening? How is climate change affecting the supply of products worldwide? What wars are happening in the world and how is this affecting global trade? This is all part of the global environment. All right, some more test prep. Five elements of the business environment. Let's go back on that one. Economic and legal, technological, the competitive environment, the social environment, and the global business environment. What are some ways a country's economic and legal systems affect entrepreneurship? Well, one major way is the tariffs that are currently being imposed on multiple countries throughout the world. And you can see in everything that you purchase that it is definitely affecting the economic systems and to some degree the legal systems because carrying out these new tariffs invite new questions about how the law is going to regulate such changes. The difference between effectiveness, efficiency, and productivity. Effectiveness is how well or how precise the product is being made. Efficiency is reducing the amount of waste, and productivity is the amount of output given the number of inputs. How does the changing demography affect business? We talked about the composition of the U.S. In race and in age and how shifts in consumer demographics can change the purchasing and buying needs of a developing and changing country. All right, diving into economics. So economics is the study of how society employs resources to produce goods and services for consumption among various groups and individuals. So what does that mean? That means that basically people have wants and needs. Those wants and needs can be affected by the economic climate, and the shifts and changes in consumption are measured through the study of economics. There are two major branches of economics, microeconomics, which discusses price, and it focuses on individual units or verticals within an economy. Macroeconomics or income theory studies aggregate economies as a whole. For example, the US or a global entity and how those changes are being made. So, some of the formulas that fall under macroeconomics would be nominal GDP, real GDP, unemployment rate, the money multiplier, consumer price index, inflation, interest rates, and theories of money. The difference between nominal and real GDP, nominal is in just basic number format. Real GDP accounts for the rate of inflation. For microeconomics, we're looking at single verticals, which include revenue, marginal and average revenue, total costs, marginal and average costs, fixed and variable costs, and profits. Resource development. So, what is resource development? Basically, it is the development of resources. And we'll talk about what resources are in a moment. But it's the study of how to increase them and how to create conditions to make better use of them. So, we can employ resource development through innovation. The example given from your textbook and the one that I've displayed here is innovations in fish farms, creating food and creating jobs. Now we're just talking about innovation in the positive sense and not necessarily the negative ways that it affects the environment. But we'll just say that innovating can create more productivity, more efficiency, and more effective business production. So, what are our resources? Resources include the factors of production, which are what help us create the business output. So, that includes land, labor, capital, which is money, entrepreneurship, and knowledge. All right. So, talking about economics. So, again, society employs resources to produce goods and services for consumption. About cross groups and individuals. The difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics. Microeconomics focuses on a single vertical, whereas macroeconomics just talks about um, entire countries or the world as a whole. So, what are five factors of production? And we have land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, and knowledge. And the question asks which one seems to be the most important for creating wealth? Well, I think that it may vastly depend on the type of business that you are involved in. But generally, the response is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship drives businesses, and the other factors of production are acquired through entrepreneurship. So, moving on to economic systems. There, there are two basic types of economic systems, command economies and free market economies. Command economies are economic systems in which the government largely decides what goods and services will be produced, who will get them, and how the economy will grow. Free market economies are economic systems in which the market largely determines what goods and services get produced, who gets them, and how the economy grows. So, in the first and command economies, the government decides, and in free market economies, the market largely decides. Right. Um, so we just learned that socialism is a type of command economy. Some of the benefits is that it creates more social equality. Socialistic economies provide free education, free healthcare, free childcare, and other basic needs of society. However, it when all of those basic needs are met and this programs are largely free, it can take away from the individual's incentive to produce and grow businesses. This leads to brain drain. Brain drain is the loss of the best and brightest people to other countries. For example, Sweden the most socialistic economy on earth currently, and they lose a lot of their intellectual talent to capitalistic economies who are able to grow and produce their own wealth and also not have to share their profits with the greater society. All right, a note about communism. So, communism is a step over socialism in that it intrudes a little bit more into people's lives. So, they generally don't allow their citizens to practice other religions than the one that has been decided by the economy. They're not able to change their jobs or their professional occupations, and they tend to not have the ability to decide where they want to live. Um, the government is generally not as adept to deciding what needs to be produced, and they're not as agile at reflecting prices to meet supply and demand. So what does this mean for the economy? It means that there can be an excess of things that are not demanded and a deficit of things which are. Or they may be priced so high that no one can purchase them, or they may sell out and to the few, and then the rest of the economy suffers. So this type of economy doesn't incentivize business people to work hard. Communism is defined as an economic and political system that the government makes almost all economic decisions and almost all of the major factors of production. Um, China is one of the major communist countries in the world today. All right, now discussing free market capitalism. Businesses operate for profit, and the entities or the business people make all the decisions. So no country is purely capitalist. If everyone who started and ran a business got to keep all of their profits, then we would be leaving out a large majority of the community, which would need to share in those profits for infrastructure such as roads, for healthcare for those that are unable to work, senior citizens, and so on. So since it's not purely capitalist, the government intervenes by determining minimum wages. They may have some price setting, and they may also be involved through lending money to businesses. But capitalism is the foundation of the US economy. So this is based on the theory of Adam Smith. He is considered the father of economics. And the theory is called the invisible hand. Um, In your PowerPoint presentation, please click on the link to watch the short video about the invisible hand in practice. So basically, essentially what Adam Smith believed is that freedom was necessary to an economy's survival within capitalism, which helped create capitalism. So what do they need freedom for? They need to be able to own land or property, and they need to be able to keep the profit of the business. This incentivizes the business owner to grow the business and to make more money. So he believed that generally people will work hard if they believe that there's a reward. In communistic and even socialistic societies, above the basic needs being met, there's really no incentive for working any harder than the next person. So the invisible hand itself is when self-directed gain leads to social and economic benefits for the whole community. So um, when the entrepreneur or the business owner has the freedom to decide, to own his property, to own the business entity, and to profit or benefit from the operation of the business, he will in turn provide some good to society that allows the whole community to benefit. That is the invisible hand. So as people are improving their own situation, they are helping the economy as a whole through producing goods, services, and ideas, through running businesses. So this yielded the four basic rights for free market capitalism. You need to be able to own private property. If that property can be taken away by the government at any time, then having a business will fail to incentivize individuals. They need to be able to own a business and keep the profits. They need the freedom of competition, which means that if there is one pizza joint in Austin, it's okay for another person to open a pizza joint. And there's no law prohibiting it because there's already a pizza joint in Austin. They need the right to freedom of choice. If a business owner wants to open a pizza joint, or they want to open a Chinese restaurant, or they want to open a sub sandwich restaurant, they are able to choose what they are working towards. So these are the critical components which will allow people to take more risks than they otherwise would, because having these basic rights will allow them to benefit from growing the business over time. All right, the trend toward mixed economics. So, as we've learned, neither free market nor command economies are completely optimal. Free markets don't respond well to the needs of individuals outside of their realm of influence. So, if they're wanting to make all the profits, then they're not necessarily putting money into the poor, elderly, disabled, or other overlooked members that cannot participate in capitalism. Free market economies may not do enough to protect the environment. If the individual company is motivated by profit, ownership, and growing of the business, then they may take advantage of natural resources. And we've seen several case studies to support this. Socialism and communism don't create wealth or grow economies fast enough, as we've given several examples. So, mixed economics means that some of the resources are made by the market and some of them are made by the government. Most countries are mixed economies at this point. Oh, and last note there, socialistic governments are tending toward a capitalistic ideal, and capitalistic countries are increasing social programs and moving slightly closer towards socialism. So I think we failed to add the definition of socialism, which is an economic system based on the premise that some basic businesses, like utilities, should be owned by the government in order to promote social equality. All right, now we will discuss these economic terms with just two cows. Socialism. You have two cows. You give one to your neighbor. Communism. You have two cows. The state takes both and gives you some milk. An American corporation. You have two cows. You sell one and force the other to produce the milk of four cows. Later, you hire a consultant to analyze why the cow has died. Fascism. You have two cows. The state takes both and sells you some milk. Traditional capitalism. You have two cows. You sell one and buy a bull. You herd multiplies. Um, your herd multiplies and the economy grows. You sell them and retire on the income. An old saying goes that whoever is not a socialist when young has no heart, and whoever is still a socialist when old has no head. All right, so what are the benefits and drawbacks of socialism? The benefits are that you have your basic needs met, such as electricity, healthcare, childcare, and so on. How does communism differ from socialism? Communism is more imposing on the community in that they define the religion, the locality, and largely the work professions or work opportunities of the people under communism. What are the four basic rights that people have under free market capitalism? The right to own private property, the right to own a business and keep the profits, the right to freedom of competition, and the right to freedom of choice. And what are the characteristics of a mixed economy? The mixed economy has characteristics of socialism and characteristics of capitalism. But they are neither socialistic nor capitalistic. They are somewhere in between. So, a more capitalistic economy that is trending towards socialism will be able to provide more programs and for by the government to protect those that are not able to participate in capitalism and to protect the environment. Those that are trending more towards capitalism are allowing private property to be owned, are allowing more entrepreneurial suits and investing in entrepreneurship to grow their economies and to incentivize people. So, how do free markets work? They make decisions about what and how much to produce and how much are made by the market. So the market is the consumer or the buyer. They decide what is in demand. They decide what will be purchased and what will be made available. So the price tells the producer how much to produce. When an item isn't available, the price goes up. So the price is not determined by the sellers, it's determined by the buyers and sellers negotiating in the marketplace. The economic concept of demand measures the quantities of goods and services that people are willing to buy at given prices. All else equal, the lower the price, the higher the demand will be. Um, so do you think there would be this many customers rushing to shop on Black Friday if it wasn't for those low price, low quantity deals? Okay, in the US economic system, basics of supply and demand. So the amount supplied will increase if the price increases because sellers want to make more money with higher prices. The supply curve shows the relationship between price and quantity supplied. Um, and the market price is the price toward which the market will trend. Here you can see the supply curve is rising from left to right. So if the price of t-shirts goes up, more sellers are willing to supply t-shirts. Supply is the quantity of the products businesses are willing to sell at different prices. Here in the demand curve, you can see the simple curve is showing the quantity of t-shirts at different prices. The demand falls from left to right. It's easy to understand why. The lower the price of the t-shirt, the higher the quantity demanded. Um, so demand equals the quantities of products consumers are willing to buy at different prices. Clear my throat. Okay. So, what is the equilibrium point? The equilibrium point is the place where quantity demanded and quantity supplied meet. So here you can see the demand curve rising as prices fall, and the supply increases as prices go up. So the point that the market decides the price and quantity is the equilibrium point. So even if the demand if the price changes at some point, the supply and demand will go back to the equilibrium point. I said that poorly. So even if there are shifts in supply or shifts in demand, the equilibrium point will determine the price in the market. All right, competing within free markets. So there are different types of competition in free markets. There is perfect competition, which means that there are no barriers to entry, that anyone can enter and exit the market as they wish. For example, pizzas would be a good example of perfect competition. Then there is monopolistic competition. That is when there are, excuse me, that's when there are a large number of sellers that have very similar products that buyers still perceive as different. Um, excuse me. An oligopoly is a degree of competition with just a few sellers dominating the market. And a monopoly is where only one seller controls the total supply of a product or service and sets the price. There are very few monopolies in the world, but diamonds is one example. All right, key economic indicators. So, the gross domestic product, or GDP, is the value of final goods and services produced in the country within a given year. So, as long as the company it resides within the country's border, the numbers go into the country's GDP. So this would include any domestic or foreign-owned entities. The unemployment rate, that is the percentage of civilians at least 16 years old who are unemployed and tried to find a job within the prior 4 weeks. So the unemployment rate does not include individuals that are not seeking employment. In early 2020, it was at 3.5%. During the COVID pandemic, unemployment dropped to 14.7%, or I should say rose to 14.7%. The average is between 4 and 5%. Here you can see the unemployment rate from 1989 to 2021. And I bet you can spot where COVID hit. And then we had the recession in 2009, which also sparked unemployment. All right, so earlier we discussed inflation as a part of real or nominal GDP. So what is inflation? It's the general rise in the prices of goods and services over time. In the chart below, you can see the price of a barrel of flour. In 1870, it was $3. Flour costs a little bit more per barrel today. And interestingly enough, if you look at the chart long enough, the price of certain things that were fairly cheap have become incredibly expensive, and some that were more expensive have become incredibly cheap. This is a mixture of oligopoly competition, such as having different brands that can charge higher prices than the quantity um, and supply price of his product given. And also from factors of production, increasing efficiency and productivity in today's market. However, all of these prices have risen since 1870. So inflation can be said that it is too many dollars chasing too few goods. So what is the Consumer Price Index? The government computes the cost of goods and services, including housing, food, apparel, and medical care, to see whether or not they are going up or down. Um, if you account for core inflation, that means that some wages and salaries, rents and leases, tax brackets, government benefits, and interest rates are based on the core inflation data. The Producer Price Index is an index that measures prices at the wholesale level. It tracks price changes in nearly all industries and producing sectors of the U.S. economy. That concludes chapter one for our lecture. I wanted to mention next week's homework, which is choosing a company for the stock project. So there are a couple criterion in which you need to choose a company. Your submission needs to account for this information, or it will not receive a grade. So it needs to be a publicly traded company in the US stock market. So if you Google the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange companies, you can find the entire list of all companies that are represented there. You want to avoid companies like BMW, who are partly privately owned, because their reporting requirements are different and they will not be fully transparent for the purposes of our stock project. Also, I wanted to explicitly mention that these companies below cannot be chosen for your project, partly because I don't want to see the same companies over and over, and partly because many students tend to choose similar companies, or these same companies. The Bitcoin ETF, if you're an accounting major, I understand that you might be interested in doing the stock project, but I'm going to nix it for the entire group because I want to avoid confusion. Apple, Amazon, Google, and Tesla cannot be chosen for the stock project. So please do not put them in your list of requests. This will go ahead and open after I post the chapter one lecture, and it's going to be under the stock project folder. So there you can submit your top three choices by ticker symbol or company. Either or both is fine. I can find it either way. But make sure that they are traded on the NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange, and check, that they're not BMW, Apple, Amazon, Google, Tesla, or any kind of Bitcoin ETF fund. That's it. I look forward to seeing your choices and have a wonderful week.